Hello everyone, welcome to my channel Risk Modeling Hub. Today is day 11 of our 100 Days of ECL Mastery series, and today we'll understand a critical topic, data sources for ECL modeling, and specifically where banks actually get their data. And here's the fundamental truth, your model is only as strong as the data feeding into it. As the saying goes, garbage in, garbage out. So, if your ECL model receives incomplete, inaccurate, or irrelevant data, it simply won't capture the true economic reality. No matter how sophisticated your calculations are, poor data quality will undermine everything. So, today we are exploring the practical operational reality of how banks source the data. We'll look at where they get information from, both internal and the external sources, and we'll discuss the specific data elements they need, identify the real world challenges they face, and walk through how the financial institutions actually solve those problems in practice. So, if you are new to my channel, let me tell you that I create easy to understand educational content on credit risk modeling and validation, Basel, IFRS 9 machine learning, and career guidance to help both the beginners and the experienced professionals build successful careers in banking and analytics. So please take a moment to subscribe to my channel and don't forget to press the bell icon so you never miss my future videos. Also, if you have any questions or suggestions, please feel free to leave them in the comments. I'll answer them. So whether you are someone just starting out in the credit risk rules or an experienced professional interviewing for senior positions, this video is designed specifically for you. So let's get started. Let's talk about why data quality in ECL models isn't just important, it's non-negotiable. The Bank of England supervisory feedback make this crystal clear. And here's what regulators are saying. Quality of governance processes over source data, data flows and data aggregations, these are essential. And do you know why? This is because accuracy of data is absolutely critical to ECL calculation. You can't build a reliable risk model, on a shaky data foundation. And the regulators are now scrutinizing these 5 specific areas. First is the ownership. Someone must be accountable for data quality. There's no ambiguity permitted here. Second is the integrity. Every data segment, the borrower attribute and transactions must be complete and accurate. Missing values are a red flag. Third is the process. You need documented policy, systematic detection, and correction of the errors. Ad hoc approaches don't cut it. Fourth is the complexity. When you are pulling from the multiple legacy systems, the error compound. You need strong controls to prevent the systematic bias. And fifth is the outsourcing. So if you are using the third party data, you still own the responsibility. You can't outsource the accountability. So here's what important to know. The 2025 PRA letter signals that the data quality has officially moved from technical concern to a board level governance issue. You need to expect the supervisory reviews to focus on this specifically on this coming round, right? Now let's map out the complete data ecosystem that feeds the ECL models. Understanding where the data comes from and the trade-offs that are involved, this is essential for building the robust credit risk frameworks. Let's first talk about the internal sources, which is on the left. This is the actual behavior of your borrowers and the exposures. Think the transaction data, the payment history, default, recoveries, loan characteristics, collateral details, etc. You also have the borrower information, their sector, subsector, geography, internal ratings, and operational data. Delinquency records, restructuring flags, stage transition history. The strength here is that it's portfolio specific and underwriting aligned. But the weakness is that the legacy systems are often scattered and the data can be incomplete or poorly coded. Now on the right, you have the external data sources, the market. This includes the benchmarks, calibrations, rating from Moody's and S&P's, credit spreads, sector migration data. You also have forward-looking indicators like GDP forecast, unemployment rates, inflation outlooks, and third-party public data like credit bureaus, supervisory stress scenarios. The strength is forward-looking in benchmark growth, but the weakness here is that it is dependent on the vendor and the inherent portfolio mismatch. Now, the modern ECL frameworks, they operate in middle, combining the internal historical calibration against the external benchmarks, and then overlaying the forward-looking hybrid signals. So below that, we see 3 hybrid data sources. First is the climate and the ESG data providers for the environmental risk. Next, the collateral valuation services for the independent market-based pricing. and the scenario analysis framework to build the probability weighted ECL estimates. So the key insight is that no single source is perfect. Best practice is blending the internal specificity with the external objectivity. Now let's get technical. Here's what the ECL models actually need. The four critical data domains that banks must extract, unify, and govern before any reliable PD, LGD, and staging outputs that can happen. So first is the borrower level data. This is the foundation. You need unique borrowers, identifiers that remain consistent across your product systems and the business lines. Then the borrower classification based on their sector, size, corporate structure, where they sit in your risk framework. You need their risk grade and rating history as well. Current and all historical transactions, demographic and behavioral data, income, employment, credit behavior, corporate finances, etc. And also the related party information like economically connected borrowers, group structures, and the guarantor relationships. Next is the facility level data. Each loan needs a unique identifier tied back to the borrower. You need facility characteristics like product, origination date, balance, maturity, rate type, and many other things. Stage classification as well, like stage 1, 2, or 3 based on your IFRS 9 logic. Collateral information like type, valuation, LTV, insurance, or realization assumptions, and also the delinquency and default history also. Next comes the time series performance, and this is why it matters. Monthly or quarterly history of every facility, the raw material for PD term structures, LGD calibrations, and cohort analysis. Each record captures the outstanding balances, interest accrued, payment received, delinquency status, modification, and restructuring flags. You aggregate this by origination, vintage, geography, product, or rating to build the cohort-based views for forward-looking ECL. Next comes the recovery data, absolutely essential for LGD modeling. When an account defaults, what happens next? So for this, recovery rates like the percentage recovered cost from the legal, workout, or the administrative expenses is most important. This data is custodied across the credit operations, the most common source of gaps in the audit focus. So the critical point is that gaps at any layer propagate the downstream, and that's where auditors focus their attention. Now the PD estimation is fundamentally about the historical default analysis. But here's the challenge. Your calibration will only hold under the audit if you get four critical data pillars: time horizon, granularity, definition consistency, and transition tracking. So first let's talk about the time horizon. Let's look at this timeline. A full economic cycle spans 8 to 10 years. It moves through the expansion, recession, stress recovery, and back to normal growth. And here's what regulators expect. You need to calibrate on specific period data that spans the multiple economic states. It's a minimal approach, right? 5 years of data, but only with documented limitations and external benchmark. So best practice is if you consider full 8 to 10 year economic cycle covering everything. Now, the default data granularity, our first pillar. You need monthly or quarterly snapshots, and don't just look at the annual data. Within each period, segment by geography, product, rating, vintage, and PD curves. Critically measure exposure at the time of the default and then carry the modeling weight. Once you get this right, your PD estimates will become robust. Next comes the default definition, and here's it gets tricky. IFRS and regulatory definitions may differ. Some definitions capture only full collateral realization or past due more than 90 days, and others capture the earlier signals. Align your system using the forward-looking logic and then critically, estimate for your full historical default base. Flag every period where the definition changes. Then comes the pillar 3, the default status transition. For matrix-driven or cohort PD models, you must track exactly where the defaults happened out of the flow of the defaults that have happened in that period. Track new defaults, accounts that defaulted during that period, and the cured default as well. Also, you need to determine the persistent defaults the accounts that remain in the default throughout. Write-offs as well, the accounts that are written off before the resolution. All this determination is necessary. So these four pillars, the horizon, granularity, definition, and the transition, these are the foundation of a defensible PT calibration. But if you miss one, and your model will fail the audit. Now LGD. It is the what happens next of the default. Unlike PD data, which is clean and centralized, recovery data is scattered across the departments: collateral, workout, cash flows, and timing. This fragmentation creates the biggest data gaps and the audit findings. Let's talk about first pillar, the collateral segmentation and the recovery rates. So this recovery rates differ dramatically by the collateral type. First, you need to look at this breakdown. Cash collateral, it recovers immediately, close to 100%. Real estate mortgages recovers over months to years, typically 70 to 90% depending upon the market. Securities collaterals recovers in days to weeks. Equipment and machinery are faster, they are more liquid, but value deteriorate. Inventory is time critical. It loses the value quickly. Unsecured exposures depend entirely on the borrower assets, highly variable. Personal guarantees recover case by case. So the critical insight here is that a single blended LGD across all the collateral types makes the critical variation. So for this, the best practice is to calibrate a separate LGD model, or at minimum a separate LGD parameter for every collateral segment. Now next pillar talks about the collateral inventory valuation and what the banks actually did. And here it gets messy. First, collateral inventory. For this you need type, location, appraisal date, issuance, and the date of valuation captured at the origination. But here's the problem. Valuation is market movement during the default means your historical data, it needs the adjustment for the current economic conditions. Next is the workout strategy. The forbearance, restructuring, collateral liquidation, time frames, unsecured collections, legal actions, everything comes under it. The process change, it shows exactly how long the collections took and the timeline money actually arrived. Next comes the cash flows and the timing. You need to track every dollar when it arrived. Total cash recovered from all the sources, combining it expressed as percentage of the outstanding at default. Next comes the modeling challenges and the data gaps, and here where the LGD estimates quietly fail. Legacy LGD estimates often include the outdated or the incomplete recovery data, right? And this creates the selection bias. Vintage bias, the older data may not reflect the current collateral values or the market conditions. Valuation point drift, this means that whether the LGD is measured at default, workout start, or collateral realization, which affects the everything. So recovery data lives in silos. Collateral, workout, legal, collections, they don't talk to each other. Your LGD model is only as good as your ability to reconcile these sources and track the cash from the default through final resolution. Now we move to the third component of the ECL, the EAD requirement, the exposure at default. This is about the exposure dynamics, forecasting the future cash flows and behavioral patterns. And here is the critical misconception we need to clear up immediately. EAD is not the current outstanding balance. This is a very common mistake. EAD is the expected exposure at the time of the default, a forward-looking figure that must be modeled across the remaining life of the maturity. So if a borrower defaults 3 years from now, you need to know what they will owe you at that particular point and not what they owe you today. And that's the fundamental difference. So let's break down how EAD work across different products. First is the term facility, a 10-year mortgage in third year. Default may occur at any time across the remaining 7 years. EAD is the balance at that future point and not outstanding today. And it requires modeling of the amortization trajectory. Second is the revolving facility, credit cards and the lines of credit. Exposure is expected, drawn balance at the default and not the current draw. Third is the embedded optionality, prepayment and the amortization. So you must model the prepayment probability driven by the rates and the borrower profile plus the schedule. So here's what the regulator focus. The credit conversion factor, which translates the commitment into actual exposure. For credit lines, borrowers typically draw 25 to 75% before defaulting. Distressed borrowers draw more aggressively. And for guarantees and the letters of credit, conversion is 50 to 100%. So EAD requires behavioral modeling and forward-looking exposure projections. Get your draw and prepayment patterns get wrong, and your EAD and your entire ECL will be understated. So internal data alone is not sufficient. One need to consider external data sources as well. And here's the reality. Your internal portfolio has blind spots. New products, you have no default history. New geographies, you have limited experience. If you have new borrower segments, then the data will be sparse. External benchmarks will fill these gaps, and they provide these calibration validation, confirming whether your internal PD, LGD, and AD estimates whether they are reasonable or not. So first stage is the source. Banks pull from the ECL compliant external data, and the primary source is the credit ratings or maybe the external credit assessment institutions like the Moody's, S&P, Fitch, and these are the foundational. Next comes the mapping and the ingestion, and this is where the work happens. You must align the external ratings to your internal risk segments and rating buckets. Then you ingest the data, applying proper security keys, validation rules, and reconciliation controls. Once, if you get this mapping wrong, and everything downstream will break. Then comes the calibration. Once ingested, you benchmark your internal ECL outputs against the external migration matrices. Then comes the weight and apply. You finally determine how much weight to give to the external data related to the internal data as per the IFRS 9 requirements. And you blend everything together to get your ECL output. So banks source from the four primary categories. First is the external rating agencies. Next is the market signals, the real-time credit indicators. Third is the forward-looking scenarios, which are the macroeconomic data. And fourth is the alternative signals like benchmarks and the emerging signals from the global credit data or maybe ESG consortiums or some satellite geospatial transaction level data. This can be used, right? So external data isn't optional, it's foundational to IFRS 9 compliance. The banks that excel at this have robust mapping, strong validation controls, and clear governance over how the external data weight map against the internal models. Okay, so now we move from what data banks need to the reality of getting it right. Data quality and governance is where most ECL implementations fail. Now let's talk about the common challenges. Banks typically operate with 5 to 15 legacy systems. LOS, risk management, specialized risk platforms, core borrower recorded systems. And each one maintains different IDs and reconciliation is a nightmare. That's a challenge one. Legacy system fragmentation, data completeness gaps are very pervasive. 40 to 60% of records have missing or unknown collateral. Right? And also a 10-year historical data set, let's say, has a drift build. And each shift now requires a reassessment. So banks get this right, which follows a four-stage approach. So stage 1, it's the segmentation and the adjustment. Within each risk model segment, the data gaps and the adjust for model group heterogeneity. Second is the conservative approach. When data is missing, use conservative assumptions and don't just guess. Then comes the external benchmarking. You need to validate your internal data quality against the third-party benchmark. Then comes the phased implementation. So here you don't try to fix everything all at once. Roll out in phases with documented data quality improvements, which is tracked over time. So best-in-class banks implement 3 distinct accountability lines. First is the business and the operations. Here they own the data entry and completeness, delinquency and default updates, and recovery tracking. Second is the risk and the compliance. They validate the data quality and reconciliation, document data limitations and validate the aggregations. Also, they verify the policy compliance. Third comes the internal audit. They provide the independent assessment of the ECL data accuracy and the stress scenarios framework documentation. Last, the most important is the external one, the statutory auditor. They operate independently but evaluate the accuracy of your aggregation, appropriateness of methodology, and adequacy of your disclosures. So here what separates the good from the best in class. They must stay consistent with the ALM stress testing, risk-based pricing, and the capital planning. So data quality isn't just a technical problem, it's a governance problem. You need accountability lines, documented procedures, and regular validation against the external benchmarks. And this is what regulators are now examining closely. Now we have covered the internal and the external data sources. We now move to the forward looking imperative, the macroeconomic overlays, scenario development, and forward looking data. And this is where IFRS 9 gets into, and banks struggle the most. So, the critical distinction the IFRS 9 demands is the PITPD, which reflects the current conditions elevated in the recession, depression, and expansion. Then comes the TTC1, the through the cycle, which reflects the average conditions across a full economic cycle, typically 8 to 10 years of the history. The data challenge here is that the PITPD is more pro-cyclical, but captures the forward momentum. You start from a TTC baseline and then adjust up or down via macroeconomic overlay and based on where you are in the cycle. If you get this distinction wrong, and your ECL is either too volatile or too static. So best in class banks follow a disciplined 4-step process. First, they estimate the scenarios where they generate the baseline upside and the downside scenarios and not just the point estimates. Then they generate the baseline upsides scenarios. How? They create the macroeconomic scenarios with explicit probability weights. Then they map the macroeconomic variables to PD using the documented regression model or the specific scenario PDs. And then they apply explicitly probability weighting, which we have seen in our previous examples, to produce the weighted ECL. So forward-looking ECL is an overlay discipline and not just a model output. Build PITPD from macro-aware regression, generate the correlated scenarios, weight them explicitly, and add novel risks like climate, maybe pandemics, that history won't deliver. And this is where the ECL becomes predictive rather than backward-looking. Now we have covered what data banks need and where they get it. Now we address the operational reality and how do you ensure the data integrity throughout the ECL entire process. So first is the data collection, where the loan origination, core banking, recovery, and the collateral systems feed. Then comes the cleans, the transform and the simplify stage, where you standardize the formats, handle the missing fields, resolve the inconsistencies. Then you aggregate and reconcile, right? Consolidate across the facility, borrower, segment, and portfolio. Then comes the validate, reasonable checks, where you have the default rules, LGD bands, and reconcile to the prior period, right? And then comes the output, the model ECL and the load. You feed the validated data into the financial systems and load into the regulatory systems. Right, so best in class banks, they layer 3 independent controls. Pre-model data validation, which checks the completeness, then the in-model execution, which performs the intermediate reconciliation, and then the post-model output, which validates the reasonableness, right? Aggregating the ECL within the historical range. So the full validation frameworks track the 5 pipeline stage, 5 data checkpoints, 3 control tiers, and 100% of the bank's accountability for outsourced data. Continuous monitoring, not one time, ensures the data integrity. So data integrity isn't just a one-time check, it's an end-to-end governance discipline across the extraction, control, outsourcing, and the monitoring. You own it. You can't just delegate the accountability even when you outsource the execution. Now let's wrap up our day 11 of our series and connect everything what we have covered so far. So first is the data quality, which is a very board level governance issue. This isn't an IT problem. The Bank of England and ECB, they have made it explicit. Data governance is now a supervisory concern. Your board needs to own it. Second is that there is no single right data source. Internal data, recovery data, ratings, macro forecast, market signals, third party data. Each has their own strength and weakness, so best practice is to blend them and know the trade-offs in each of them. Third is the IFRS 9 forward-looking requirement, which reshapes the architecture. Historical PD alone won't be sufficient. You need scenarios, overlays, and the emerging risks like climate, geopolitical, and you need to blend them into a model. Then the data integration and aggregation, which is where most the implementation fails. You can have the great data source, but if reconciliation breaks down and under aggregation, it leads to the reconciliation delays and your model fails. Then the end-to-end governance accountability, it must be explicit. Every field needs an owner, a validator, and an escalation path. Last is the cloud and the third-party solutions, which requires robust oversight. You can outsource the processing, but not the responsibility. So we are now on the day 11 of the 100 days of ECL Mastery series. Right? Today focus was the data sources where banks get their data. The journey continues, and in the day 12 we'll dive into the historical data requirements for the ECL models. How many years of data you actually need and what to do when these segments are data thin, common historical data pitfalls and the traps. We are building the conceptual foundation, practical operational context, and regulatory framing that separates the candidates who can contribute from those who just recite the definition. So, if you are preparing for credit risk role, here words you need to focus on. Build the practical operational context that lets you contribute and don't just recite. Also, understand the trade offs between the internal and the external data. Know why the data integration is hard. Be able to articulate why the governance matters beyond the compliance. And these are the questions the senior interviewers actually ask. So, if you have found today's video useful and learned something new, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel Risk Modeling Hub so you don't miss any future episodes of the 100 Days of ECL Mastery series. Also, if you have any questions or feedback, or if there is any specific topic you would like me to cover next, let me know in the comments. I read every comment and would love to hear from you. So, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.